Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Cambridge English Elite. Today, I thought about making a video on different types of narrative structures. As you know, narrative writing is story writing. I hope everybody knows that. And narrative writing, it's an important part of every kind of syllabus, whether you are an O-level student, whether you are appearing in English IGCSE, whether it's AQA, GCSE, or A levels. Narrative writing is actually something that we cannot simply get rid of, right? So I've come up with four types of narrative structures, which we are going to discuss in this video. And basically, mainly, I'm going to focus upon the narrative arc that we also call Freytag's pyramid, right? So let's get started. As you can see on my screen, the first structure is linear or chronological narrative. Now, linear chronological narrative is a straightforward kind of story. It's a story in which you follow a sequence of events, right? Like, for example, a person who starts writing his story from the beginning, his childhood, then something happens, right? Maybe there's a conflict he faces when he becomes an adult, and then at the end of the story, he's an old man, right? So that's a linear, a predictable kind of story. It's a type of narrative structure, but I don't recommend my students to go for a linear or a chronological narrative, right? The second one is a non-chronological structure. Non-chronological structure, or we also call it, as you can see over here, the second note, that is non-chronological structure. It is also known as fragmented narrative. Fragmented is like there's a character who is switching between the present and the past. Lots of flashbacks. Maybe in the flashback, he meets a character, somebody who has an impact on his life, right? And then they both get connected. And then, it's actually a switch between, it shows switching between present and past, right? That's a fragmented story structure. It's also not very organized and not very easy to handle, right? Okay, the third one. So the third one is the narrative arc. Narrative arc, as I said, it's a story mountain in simple words, right? And we go through different elements of a narrative when we before we reach the ending of the story, right? I'm going to discuss it in detail, so I'll move towards circular structure. Circular structure, or we also call it cyclical structure. Now, why is it known as a cyclical structure? Is because sometimes what we do is we start our story on one while sitting at one place. Let's say we are sitting in a room, and we are actually the character is sitting in his room, and he's actually becoming nostalgic as he looks at maybe the bookshelves in one corner, and he opens up an old book which has some a diary maybe, and he goes into he goes into flashbacks, he becomes nostalgic, right? And at the end of the narrative, we come back to the same room where the character was seated, right? He was observing the surroundings, and he was actually going through reading the diary, and we come back to the same point in the story. That is what we call a cyclical structure, starting from the same ending at the same point where you started the story, right? It can be the same place. You're sitting in a garden, right? And the garden is full of blooming flowers, blossoming trees, and the fresh air, and you're feeling very relieved and happy. But at the end of the story, you're sitting in the same garden, but the plants have wilted away, right? The wind is no longer fresh, right? It seems to be howling, it seems to be threatening in nature, maybe because something has happened in the middle part of the story. A tragedy maybe has struck you, and because of has struck the character, because of which he has lost all his happiness, that he had in the beginning of the story when he was sitting in the garden, maybe sipping a hot, sizzling cup of coffee, right? But at the end, he's in the same garden. The circumstances, the surroundings may have changed, right? So that is also what we call a cyclical structure, starting, ending at the same point you started the story with. It can be the same setting, the place, it can be the same idea, right? And but there might be a little bit of contrast, maybe in the feelings of the character. He was happy in the beginning at the same place, but at the end of the story, he's not at all happy. He's feeling lonely, depressed, and he's sitting alone, right? Okay, coming now towards what we call narrative arc. Okay, right? Let's discuss what narrative arc is. And this is actually a Freytag's pyramid, which I said earlier, right? This is the most common type of narratives structure that we call, mostly students, they follow this structure, and it's good. It's not that I tell my students that you work on this because Freytag's pyramid is a good way to organize your events, to organize your story. But again, I'm going to discuss different structures later, the different story startings. I'm going to make a video on that as well. How to begin a story, how to end a story. So let's see what we have in Freytag's pyramid. As you can see, there's an exposition over here. Exposition is actually the background information of the plot that includes character and setting. Now, exposition is what we call the beginning of the story. Beginning, it's good to establish the setting and the characters. Setting is the place where the main action of the story takes place, right? So if I begin my story with a character maybe who is trying to wriggle out of his bed, he's trying to get up himself, get himself together, right, to get out of the bed because maybe there's been, a bad dream he has been having, maybe because he's actually, has been ill for some time, or maybe he has been suffering from depression. He tries to get out of the bed, and while he's looking at the windows, the curtains, right, sunlight that is forcing its way through the windows that are, covered with layers of dust because he has not been, it's a long time, he has not been able to actually dust them off, right? So this is where I establish the setting, where the main character, what is he actually feeling like, what is he actually doing like, and where is he situated, right? So that is what we call exposition, and mostly examiners, Cambridge examiners who check O-level IGCSE papers, they mostly recommend it's better to establish the setting right in the beginning of the story. It's better the earlier you tell where your character is, situated, the better it is, right? Okay, then in every story we have an initial incident. As you can see, initial incident is the very first conflict. It's a conflict, a problem that a person faces in a story, right? Any problem. It can be any conflict. Maybe a villain is there, a protagonist faces a villain. Maybe he actually thinks that, the character has some internal problem. For example, he has some, there's a place that the family is going to, and the character, he's thinking about, like, for example, he thinks he's actually in a quandary. He cannot decide whether he should go to that place or not. So that is a conflict he's facing, right? So it can be an external conflict, it can be internal conflict inside the character when he's unable to decide, right? It can be external conflict. Maybe he has fear of something, somebody, a supernatural force, or anybody else, his father, his mother, another character, an antagonist, right? Rising action is this part of the story, as you can see on the screen, right? So this is where tension begins to build, right? This is actually what we there's another name for Freytag's pyramid in simple words. That is what we call story mountain. When we are hiking a mountain, we climb a mountain. It is very difficult to climb a mountain. So rising action is actually, in rising action, you are going to include the events which actually show how difficult it is getting for the character, right, to overcome all the problems that he's facing in his life. So, rising action are the events that add suspense or tension to the plot, complications, frustrations that lead to the climax of the story, right? Climax, that is the most suspenseful part of the plot. It is the turning point. It is the point where there is no going back, right? It is the point where something is going to happen, and after something, a situation, maybe the character, he comes face to face with with his nightmare. That nightmare can be, metaphorically, I'm using it maybe for a person that he dreads, right? Maybe an antagonist, he comes face to face with that. Maybe the internal conflict he was facing, maybe he suffers from social anxiety, and in the climax part, he's actually he is actually exposed to lots of people, right? So that is what we call the climax of the story, the turning point of the story, where there's lots of suspense, where the character has actually he has come face to face with his, with with the thing that he fears the most, right? Maybe. So that is what we call the climax of the story. Coming now after the climax, there is always a falling action. Like for example, if there's I often tell my students, it's like a storm coming, right? Story is like a storm. Before storm, what happens? The tension builds up. The wind begins to howl. The wind begins to, screech through the trees, and the trees, they are, first they were dancing when the weather was fine, but when the storm is gonna come, they began to, they whip around just like as if they are going crazy, right? So then the intensity of the wind increases, it whooshes, it roars while it, drags the trees along with it, right? And then what happens? There's a storm, there's a thunderstorm, maybe lots of rumbling, roaring of the clouds can be heard, flashes of lightning tearing the sky apart, right? So after the storm, what happens? There's a falling, what I tell my students to relate falling action with, when the storm is subsiding, right? The storm is mitigating, right? The wind begins to, begins to decrease in its intensity. The rains get slower, right? The heavy downpour has changed into a drizzle now, right? So that is what we call falling action, because we are moving towards the ending, when things are going to get calm, when the storm is actually eventually going to come to an end, right? So falling action, these events that unravel the conflict between the protagonist and antagonist that lead to the resolution. So falling action is actually what happens as a result of the climax. What happens as a result of the climax? Maybe one character wins, the other loses. Maybe, for example, if you made up a story about a problem in school, and a student, he faces a problem, there's a for example, a fight between the protagonist and the antagonist, and the fight was the climax part. The falling action as a result of that climax, what happens? Is the character, has he been suspended from the school? Is he suspended? Is he, expelled from the school? Have his parents been called to the school for a meeting, right? Has he been issued a warning letter? So that is what we call falling action. What happens as a result of the climax? And after that, we come to denouement, or we call it resolution as well. Denouement is the tying up of the loose end. What happens at the end? Does our character live or die? Does he suffer from depression? Does he regret what happened? Did he learn a good lesson? Did he realize something at the end? Did he undergo, a character transformation? Maybe there's a change in himself, right? So maybe a moral awakening or something like that, right? So that is what we call denouement or resolution. So this is one what we also call it a Freitag's pyramid, a story mountain, a narrative arc, and a linear structure as well. Because linear is like you're just starting to climb the mountain. There's a problem you face, and you just go up the mountain, you come down the mountain, and things become calm at the end. Every problem, that seems to be resolved, and maybe there's a change in the character for good. That is the ending of the narrative, right? So this is a simple narrative structure, but I'm going to give you one or two examples of this Freitag experiment, and for that purpose, um, okay, so let's see exposition. Actually, I'm just giving you a simple idea of how to make a story. You know very much that story depends, making up a plot actually depends on the topic of the story as well, right? But to make you understand better that how this narrative structure works, I've a story. I've actually come up with a story, a plot that I think is going to explain this much better. Exposition, as I said, it is the beginning, starting of the story. Maybe at the beginning of the story, there's a character who is at home alone. Okay, right? So what we call is, for example, right? So character is at home alone, right? This is my exposition. Exposition, I'm introducing the character. Also, I'm going to introduce the setting, the home where he is locked up. He's all locked up, right? Why? Because nobody is at, his parents, they are at work or they have gone somewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to describe a little bit of the surrounding, the setting, the house maybe, and the character. What is he doing? How old is the character? And maybe that this is the first time, or maybe this is the fifth time he's home alone, right? So we are going to describe a little bit of the sounds. Whenever we talk about setting, remember, always focus upon our five senses, as many as you can use. Maybe the sense of taste, touch, sight, hearing, what kind of sounds are coming, right? What you can hear, what the character, maybe he's reading a book, right? Maybe he's eating something. So the smell, the delicious aroma of food is wafting around him, right? And he's enjoying that he's alone at home because he's gonna watch his favorite movie that his parents never allowed him to do, right? And he's also making some, he's frying some potatoes, some eating some, he's, feeding on fries or something like that, right? So this is how we set the scene. Exposition, the character is home alone. He's locked up. Why? Because his parents, they are at work and he's going to spend the night all alone, right? But what we can talk about is he's sitting beside maybe the crackling fire, right? And he's actually munching, we can say munching crisps and watching and relishing his favorite movie, his favorite film, right? We can also name it over here, whatever it is, right? And um, maybe snuggled, he is actually snuggling under the blanket, the warm woolen blanket, right? Okay, so that is where we set the scene and the characters, right? Now, coming up to the next part, conflict. What is the conflict in the story? For example, the conflict may be the person, the character of the story, he hears a noise. He heard a noise, maybe the noise of the footsteps, which are, uh, he could hear a faint sound of the footsteps, right? He could hear maybe the creaking of the floorboards as well, right? Boards as well, right? So this is something that is a conflict. And then what he does is that there's a problem in the story now. The problem has been introduced. He feels somebody's inside the house, right? So what he does is he just and gets up and starts walking and starts to walk through the corridors, through the house maybe, right? He starts to walk through the house to have a look at the problem he's trying to identify. He might be scared as well. And what he notices, maybe a window is open, right? A window is left open, right? So that is where there's a light, uh, slit in the window, maybe, right? So that is where the problem begins because we can sense that there is something, maybe an intruder in the house. Then we come to the third part, which we call rising action. Rising action is where what happens that maybe he starts to look around the house and he's observing more and more weird things, right? Like he goes into his room and he sees, maybe he was at first sitting in his lounge, but now in his room he notices maybe something like a wet towel, maybe footprints, muddy, we can say that, muddy footprints. Maybe it has been raining outside, muddy footprints. So the tension escalates. He is actually, his heart, this is where his heart is pounding, right? So what he does is he just calls someone, calls police or someone, right? Because he thinks that there is something wrong. Okay, we come to now the climax of the story. Now he's waiting. He's actually in his room. He has locked it up and he's waiting for some help to arrive, right? But the climax part is where he actually confronts the intruder in the house, right? So what happens? He confronts an intruder. I'm right now typing in what I call present tense, but when you're writing a story, please, it's very important to maintain tense. It's not wrong to write in present tense. You can write in present tense, but the problem is when students they start writing in present tense, they always switch into past, right? Past and present, and it's difficult for them to handle. So it's better that you start writing a story in past tense, because that way you won't be able to switch into present again and again. And dialogues are always there in a story, and dialogues they can be written in present tense as well. Mostly dialogues are in present tense, right? So he confronts an intruder, and that intruder actually he comes face to face. Over here we can describe that intruder, that person. Maybe he's clean shaved, or he has a bushy he has bushy eyebrows, right? And maybe clean shaved ears, right? Maybe he may be wearing a mask as well. So if he's wearing a mask, you won't say that he's clean shaved, right? And a cap that is sitting on his head. The curls of his hair, they might be sticking out of the head, right? So the person is there. There may be an exchange of dialogue, right? But then a dialogue that he speaks, maybe he's pinpointing, he's pointing a pistol towards the character. Okay, we come to now the falling action. So what is falling action going to be? That is where help arrives. Sirens of police vans wail into the air, and at that very moment, that what happens? As he hears the sound, the intruder vanishes from the room. Maybe he vanishes, maybe he flees away at the speed of light, right? Of light, right? And then you just run away, you just run towards the door, you open it up, and police is there, and the police searches the house, right? As he disappears, the police, it's combs the house to find him out, but nobody's there, nobody is there. And after that, what happens as a result of it? They leave the house, right? And then we come to resolution. Now resolution, what happens is that the boy is again, the main character is home alone, right? He's again home alone, nobody's there. The house, that has been thoroughly searched, and everybody knows that there's no intruder in the house, and it is safe. The boy is also, he feels safe. The problem is resolved, And what he does, the windows are shut, everything is windows are shut, right? And he continues watching the movie, and but then something happens. What is that? That there may be a loud thud that he hears. Was he still lurking in the house? Okay, so I've ended the story here. What happens is it's a very simple plot. We are going to be discussing, we are going to be making plots on different topics, right? I'm going to be making videos on them as well. This is just to make you people understand what narrative arc is. So the boy is home alone again. He's feeling safe because the police, they have searched, combed every nook and corner of the house. They have ensured the boy that there's nothing wrong, and everything, the windows, they are shut and the doors are shut and there's nobody inside the house. So again, um, the problem has been resolved at the end of the story. But let me tell you something. In this narrative arc, I've taken, I've, made a little bit of change in the ending. In the resolution, I've tried to follow a little bit of circular structure or cyclical structure as well. How? In the first paragraph, the boy was home alone, right? He was sitting, munching, right? Watching his movie. In the last paragraph, again, the boy is home alone. He's feeling safe. The windows are shut, and again, he continues watching the movie. So from the point where I started the story, I came back to the same point, following a cycle, following a circle, right? So I may also call it a circular or a cyclical structure, right? But at the end, what I did, I left it sort of cliffhanger type of ending. Now, don't get confused what cliffhanger is. I'll discuss it in my later videos when we talk about the story openers and the different ways of ending stories. This is one of the way you end a story. So cliffhanger is something where you leave the readers, wondering what might have happened next. So this is one way of leaving a story on a cliffhanger sort of ending. That again, he hears a noise, that is a loud thud, as if something has fallen on the floor somewhere in the kitchen, right? And so at the end, I leave it on a question. That was the intruder. Was he still lurking in the house? Question mark. So that's for the readers to think about. The readers are wondering whether he's still there or not. We don't know whether he's still, because the story has ended, and this is one way, this is a very attractive way of ending a story, a cliffhanger. And cliffhanger is you leave the readers wondering, you leave the readers in suspense. They might be wondering what might happen next, but the common way, the easy way of using a cliffhanger ending is to end it on a question the way I did here, right? So it's not a very intriguing plot that we have made, but this plot is actually just to make you people understand easily what a narrative structure is. And we are going to talk about different structures of narrative in my later videos. I'll be doing videos on different ways of starting a story, the ways of ending a story, and also what kind of how to structure a plot, and the other things that we haven't talked about in this video. What is foreshadowing, what is flashback, what is flash forward, how to include a dialogue, right? And the different ways of improving expression, right? That we are going to do in our later videos. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. See you next time very soon. Thank you.